Hey everyone, in this video, we will be talking about querying for data. In the previous slide set, we tackled creating query sets, which are basically queries for the data that we have in our database through an ORM using Django. So in this video, we'll be tackling the underlying structure that the ORM uses. So we talk about SQL for a little bit, and then we will talk a bit more about the different methods used in creating query sets. Okay, and then we talk about Django lookups, which is the bulk, or which is used when creating my filters. Okay, so basic SQL syntax looks something like this. You have the keyword select, and then if you want to get all distinct rows, meaning you don't have any repeat data, you use the distinct keyword, and then after that, you have the different columns that you want to select, or the asterisk to get all the columns, followed by the from keyword, and then the table that you want to get data from. Okay, you should remember this from CSI 20, but so here it is again. But in the next semester, you would also still see this again because that will be your database class. Okay, now this first syntax just gets all the data, all rows. If we want to limit the rows by whatever condition, we use the where keyword or the where clause. Okay, so you have where and then all the possible conditions that you want to check. So what are the possible conditions? You can use checking if it's in between. Okay, so if the field value is in between values 1 and 2, or if the field's value is in this list of values that you accept, or if that field's value is like this string that you're writing down. Okay, I'm not going to talk more about how this syntax works. Okay, just know that that's how it looks like. So in the SQL diagnostic, that's how it should have looked like. Okay, and then you can combine conditions using ends, or even a not. Okay, so the rows that you're selecting should satisfy both condition and condition 2, condition or condition 2, and if you want to basically select everything that does not follow the condition, then say not, where not condition. Okay, so that is the SQL raw queries, but we are using an ORM. So how does that work? We have query set models. Okay, but I skipped over a slide, so that's about the order by clause. And the order by clause basically just orders the data that you have, or your rows, by a specific field that you say, and order it ascending or descending depending on what you say. Okay, so going back, Django query sets. Okay, so query sets are basically collections of specific models constructed by a models manager. It is an abstraction over raw SQL queries, and they are lazy until evaluated. Lazy meaning for every query set method that you call, it does not necessarily mean that that already hits your database immediately. Okay, so Django only goes to your database once it is evaluated. Okay, and what does that mean when it is evaluated? That means it is iterated. So you did a for loop over your query set. You get the length of the query set, so via the len attribute. So that it works like a list. So you can a query set is like a list. So you can do a for loop over it. You can check its length via the len method, or you can transform it into a very raw list by using the list method. Okay, so when you do any of these three actions, you basically evaluate the query set and hit the database. So like I talked about before, we have a bunch of different methods for working with query sets. You have the .all method that selects all rows, the order by method to order any results, and it takes in a parameter, the field parameter, to say which field you are to order it by, the values list, which is basically a list of all values, or a comma separated, you basically put in all the fields you want separated by commas. It's not necessarily a list. Okay. You have a filter method that takes in a lookup that we will be talking about later. We also have a get method. So the get method, like the filter method, takes in a lookup. However, it only returns a record and not a query set. So it only returns one item. If it does not find an item, it throws an error. Okay? And then you have an annotate method, which adds a calculated data or a calculated value based off other values in your record. Okay? So that works on a per record um, basis. Okay? So dot filter was discussed in the previous slide set. It uses, on the previous module, it uses lookups. So let's not talk about that. The the order by method takes in a field, as I said. Okay. If you add a minus sign before the field, it means that it's a descending order. So you're ordering it by that field in descending order. If it does not have that, it is in ascending order. So again, values list takes in two or more arguments. One are the list of methods, or the list of fields rather, and then after that, it takes two more arguments, two more optional arguments, namely the flat argument. These are keyword arguments. Okay, so these namely are the flat and named arguments. So those arguments. So the flat argument tells Django to return a list of tuples, basically a pair of values. Or if it's a named tuple, so basically when you return a list of tuples, it will be a tuple of all the values that you want. So basically your query set would contain a list, and inside that list, okay, each index would be a tuple, and then the tuple would have the values of values that is specified. If you say true to the named argument as well, the tuple would be a named tuple, meaning instead of just say a list that looks something like this. Okay, let's go back to our text editor. So if I say item dot objects dot values list dot all dot values list, and then let's say id text, and then I say named is equal to true and flat is equal to true, that will return to me something like this. It will be a list of tuples, wherein this would be, let's say, 1, or it would be something like id 1, text first item. So to get values from there, okay, so if we store this in an items list, it would look something like this. Let's do a for loop over it. For item in items, print item dot id, or print item, no, not dot, item id, for item text. Okay, so that's how it would look like. So a caveat with values list is that you first have to do a filter or an all so that you have the rows. Okay, the values list won't do anything if it didn't query first. Okay, it only modifies a query. Okay, now those methods, okay, aside from values list, returns a query set. Okay, but get does not return a query set like I previously said. It returns only a single record. Okay, and since they return query sets, you can filter that query set further by chaining it. What do we mean by chaining it? By chaining it, we mean something like this. Okay, so like I did a while ago, I called .all, and then I specify the values list. Or let's say I filter and I get this item and I annotate it. Okay, so by annotation, that means I'm adding this attribute and then this value. Basically, I'm counting all the subtasks that I have. So this assumes that I have a table where it's self-referencing. Okay, or another way of chaining, I have this due dates variable that basically gets all my items. I'm ordering it by the due date. And then I'm flattening a list and all the values there are my due dates. So there I would have a list that contains all my due dates. Okay, so let's try this query set thing by using the Django shell. Okay, so I'll introduce you to the Django shell. So it's you get it by typing Python manage.py shell. So that creates a Python shell for you. So it's an interactive Python shell. If it doesn't look this pretty, you can, as it says on the top here, install IPython inside the virtual env. So you would type something like, I'll quit this, pip install IPython, so something like that. So IPython equals 7.5. So that's the version I'm using that makes it pretty. Manage.py shell. That will create a shell. Let's clear everything. Okay. Now, I have to, this basically creates an environment wherein it seems like I'm inside my application. So I can test my application code here. I can play around with it. So let's say I import from .models list.models import item. Okay, and then first item is equal to item.objects.create, and then my text is equal to first item, second item equal to item.objects.create, text is equal to second item. Okay, so now if I make a query set that says I want to get everything, if I say, let's say item.objects.all, I get a list, a query set, as it says here, of 2 item objects. I did not save it to a variable, so let's save it to a variable, saved items. Now I can do a for loop over that saved items. For item in saved items. Okay, what do? I can print. I can print item.text. So that's the text value. We could also say saved items is equal to item.objects dot, wait, I will show you something. I will show you how to check for all the properties. So we can use the dir command for that. Dir saved items. So that will show you all the possible things that a query set has. Because the saved items is a query set, you can see all the properties that you could call on it. Or we can go let's go back to our for loop. We could probably dir the item so that you can see what properties there are on the item. Okay. Okay, it didn't print that out, sadly. Well, maybe we can dir the first item. And you have all the methods and properties, hidden properties of the model class. Okay, so here's our field. That's the text. We also have the PK, the primary key. Okay, so let's try that again. Let's say saved items is equal to item dot object. So that's our manager dot all, and then I get a values list of, let's say I just want the ID, and what happens if it's a named is equal to true. Okay, you know what, I'll just not save it to a variable so that you can see it. Okay, that might be in the newer Django version, but definitely there's flat. Flat is equal to true. So I will have a query set that contains 1 and 2. Okay. Now let's try and order it. So if I say item.objects.all.order by, so as you can see, by default it was ascending. So let's get it descending. I want it to be the ID, right? Or let's say the primary key. Order by with an underscore. PK is not defined because it should be the ID. Should be a string. There we go. Obviously, you cannot see what items there are. How do I expose it? I can use the values list. Say ID flat is equal to true, so that it only gives me my ID, and then now it's a 2 and 1. Okay. To show you how the get works, .objects.get ID is equal to 2. Let's save it, B, and then let's print b.text. We expect it to say second item. Okay, so that's how it works. Now, there are other query set methods that don't return query sets. An example of that is the create that we just used, or some other query set methods like get or create, which creates a method which gets a model, or if it does not exist, it will create that model. There's also the .count method that checks for its length instead of using the length keyword. And then there's also another aggregate. Okay, I'm just showing you the aggregate. We're not going to use it a lot or at all. So we can try this out as well. So let's say saved items. Remember, saved items is a query set. Okay, so saved items dot count gives us 2. We could actually try and check for saved items dot aggregate max pk is equal to max, let's say pk. So let's get the last item. Oh, I have to import it, so I'm not gonna deal with that now. Okay. And now let's go to lookups, which is going to be the contents of our filter. So new query. Okay, query set item.objects.filter, and then what does this filter contain? It contains lookups. So there are different types of lookups. There are checking for, again, similar to what we did in SQL a while ago, if they're in the list of values, or if it contains a string, if it is exactly that string, if it's greater than a number, greater than equals, less than equals, or if the value is null. Okay, so let's look at that. There's a typo in the slide set, but once you see the slide set, it will be up to date and fixed. So let's say text. Okay, so filter. I want to filter. Obviously, I only have two, but this is a hypothetical. Text contains item. So new query set. I have two items. So let's print everything for item in new query set. Print item.text. You get both. But if I only check for a small letter I, let's see, new query set dot count, there will be still two because we're not checking for exactness. Okay. However, this should not return anything because we say this is basically checking if the text is exactly like item. Obviously, we don't have that. It's similar to this. Okay. If we count that, there's nothing. Okay. Item.objects.filter text in, and then we can give it a list. First item. There's a list. Okay. Now let's count how many there is. There's one. So what is that single one? Let's get the first item there. The text first item. Okay, because it is a list, you can still use your list how you would manipulate a list. I could slice it. Okay, still fine. So that's in item.objects.filter. The ID is less than 2, or let's say 4, which means that it will get everything, right? So that's two items. One dot text second item. Okay, so that's how those lookups work for the filter, and that's also how it works for the get method. Okay, so that's it for this video. In our next series, we will be talking about the different types of fields that exist in Django, how they work, and in a later video, we'll talk about how to create forms inside Django using Python so that we get full validation of our inputs. Okay? See you next time.